Okay, yes, I know just yesterday we did our PlayStation news stories, but as many of you know, I film, edit, and upload Thursday night for it to go live Friday morning, so I was really kind of in a bad spot when come Friday morning, all this big PlayStation news broke out, like Sony shipping 94 million PS4s as of December 31st, or PSN revenue making more, having more revenue than all of Nintendo and Xbox for the year of 2018, or Sony recently filing a patent that they filed it back in 2017, but it recently went live in public January 31st of this year, which is for backwards compatibility. And that's what we're going to talk about, because this patent is very interesting and tells us a lot about what we could see in the future. And I know many people are very passionate about this feature on PlayStation. So let's talk about it. Now, as I just mentioned, Sony did file this over 2 years ago. Actually, exactly January 20th is when they filed it, recently going public not only more than 2 days ago now at this point. And if we really look at it, I mean, the first detail that we really want to look at here is actually the inventor of the patent. And what does it say? Mark Evan Cerny. Now, they misspelled Cerny, or maybe that's my just translation on Google Chrome messing up or whatever. Obviously, it's Mark Cerny, and Mark Cerny, of course, being the lead architect of PlayStation 4 and PlayStation Vita, and presumably he will be the lead architect on PlayStation 5. Now, this is more fascinating, honestly, than anything else, because the very fact that Mark is being credited with this specific patent and this specific technology that we will soon talk about, this tells you that he's really spearheading this sort of feature, and I would expect this to possibly come to the end consumer, because that's the thing about patents initially, right, is that whenever we talk about patents, any multi-billion-dollar company has thousands of patents that almost never see the light of day. Only very few actually make it to end consumer products. So that's why something like this, whenever we talk about patents on this channel, we always kind of have to remember, like, well, we may never actually see this. And we've talked, over the 6 years of me doing this YouTube channel, we've talked more about patents that have never happened than patents that have happened. But the fact that Mark is spearheading this really is good. This is good news. So to get into the details about the patent, it more or less is referring to software emulation. Basically, the CPU is tricking the software into believing that it's being played on legacy hardware when actually it's brand new hardware. That's more or less what the patent's saying. It gives you a nice little diagram and a little chart. The thing that we have to go back to is when it comes to backwards compatibility, there are two ways that console manufacturers achieve this. One is software emulation or system on a chip. System on a chip being putting the actual hardware, the old hardware that you're trying to, play into the brand new hardware. And while that guarantees very good compatibility, it sometimes gets very expensive because that involves actually putting the hardware in new hardware. That's completely involved in the manufacturing process, which is why the original fat PlayStation 3 was very expensive and ultimately system on a chip was removed down the road. Then there's software emulation. And we've done videos on this before where we go at greater length. You can try and find those on the channel. But the software emulation is the system pretending to be the other system software-wise. And while that has varied success and it does work, it's a lengthier process. It doesn't always work. There's no guaranteed successes. And there's a reason why sometimes you just don't see manufacturers pursue software emulation, because it can be very dodgy or very hit and miss. This is why Microsoft doesn't let everybody play every single 360 and original Xbox game on Xbox One. It's a title-by-title basis, because Microsoft has to stress test every single one of them, make sure they work, QA the whole game, make sure there's no incredibly game-breaking bugs or low frame rate or what have you. They make sure the game works so it can be approved to be released as a software emulation title on Xbox backwards compatibility. So those are the two methods. This is software emulation, and it looks like this is a very good way for Sony to possibly achieve backwards compatibility with all those previous PlayStation platforms. Now, the thing that we want to remember with this patent, there's nowhere at all where it specifically mentions what platforms these are for. We don't know if it's for PS4 or for PS5. We don't know if it's for actually playing PS3, PS2, PS1 games. We don't know any of that. It's basically just a patent saying we have an idea for backwards compatibility. This is how it's going to be achieved via the diagram and via the description that is on the patent. It's very long. You can sort of read it. And it's, somewhat complicated to read because it's very methodical sounding and things like that. But it's more or less software emulation. It's just a matter of, it seems like Mark maybe has determined some sort of particular emulation that is very successful, that it seems like they've produced some sort of situation where it seems to see a pretty good success rate, I would hope, with most games. It essentially actually says that the system is spoofing the processor IDs to facilitate the achievement of playing the games, actually. So now let's look at the timeline here. It was filed 2 years ago, but that tells us that it's been worked on well beyond those 2 years. You'd have to assume that at some point this was started maybe in 2015, maybe 16, maybe as early as 14. A somewhat loose example is PlayStation VR, for example. Now, we didn't see it actually ever get revealed until GDC 2014, if I'm not mistaken, and they had tested it and explored it as early as 2010. So what can we sort of draw from that? Well, that it's certainly something Sony actually has been very serious about. Maybe this whole time they've actually been listening to everybody's concerns and thoughts and things like that, and are trying to do something for backwards compatibility. Now, is this for PS4 or PS5? I'm obviously going to say I think this is for PlayStation 5. For a myriad of reasons. One thing being PlayStation 5 will be a more powerful platform. So it will have the power necessary to easily achieve this, because in a somewhat very loose way, I mean, the more power you have, the somewhat easier it is to achieve the emulation. It's not a guaranteed thing. It's not a plug and play sort of scenario, right? Obviously, there's a lot of things that go into this, but with more hardware power, it's certainly an easier way to achieve the a higher frame rate and the game running more fluidly, assuming that again, the emulator works quite well. So PlayStation 4 has always been this system where it's like, okay, well, right off the jump, you're not going to get PS3 games. I've always said that from the beginning, and I think Sony knows that they can't emulate PS3 games on PlayStation 4 because PS3 uses the cell processor, which is a very overly complex architecture that is they just kind of shot themselves in the foot when they made PlayStation 3. So I'm thinking this might be a thing where they've been building up to this whole point, because it's a process. It takes years to do. There's years of working on this emulator, and this could be maybe a marquee feature of PlayStation 5 once the system is revealed and released. And the thing is, we were always really expecting PlayStation 5 to support backwards compatibility with PS4 because they're actually the same architecture. We pretty much know that PlayStation 5 is going to be based off x86, much like the PlayStation 4 is. So it would be quite, well, I never like saying easy because I'm not a hardware engineer. I don't know that. But you would assume it's much more easier to achieve doing backwards compatibility with that particular platform. But if you go to, say, PS3, that's where it becomes a bit of a mess. Now, PS4 can handle a PS2 emulator. It has a PS2 emulator. It can handle a PS1 emulator. We know it can do that. Those platforms are quite old enough to the point where it's certainly a possibility that they could explore that and release that on, say, PS4. But as I've mentioned in a video I did previously, I don't think Sony wants to deal with the legality, QA process, and making sure that every single game works and the emulator works quite well. And I still sort of believed that at the time for PlayStation 4, but now, obviously, it's a matter of, well, the reason why they never did emulation on PlayStation 4 is because they said, well, I think it's a situation where they're saying, let's let PlayStation 4 be its own platform because it's selling incredibly well. There's no reason where we have to do this or to put in the emulator, right? It's doing well on its own. Let's spend all these years working on a proper emulator for, say, our next platform, PlayStation 5. That platform, PS5 can come out, and now, boom, it can play every single PlayStation before it, which would be a dream. I mean, I think that's what we all want, right? Is going back to the early PS3 days where we had one PlayStation that played all of our games. That would be fantastic. And this still gets a bit muddy. It doesn't guarantee anything because the patent doesn't tell us anything really. It doesn't say if it will work with disc-based games or if it will work with digital titles. It doesn't say, maybe this could be a situation where it will just purely be playing PS4 games, PS2 and PS1. Maybe PS3 is still somewhat too complicated for PlayStation 5-esque hardware to do. I mean, we don't know. But I would hope that that's the case, right? Because obviously PS4 does not have the power. It does not have the means to play PS3 games. I don't think it's even remotely possible. I think Sony knows that, and that's why they've had to ignore it and pursue things like PlayStation Now, which they're still very serious about. but they've been waiting for their next-gen hardware to give you that software emulation with not only it doesn't need it for PlayStation 4 presumably, but not only for PlayStation 4, but PS3, PS2, and PS1. And it makes a whole lot of sense because not only is it a very vocal minority of people that really want this feature and it instills a lot of goodwill onto the consumer, but this makes it would make something like PlayStation 5 very relevant in a time where PC is doing so well. PC is a great platform. So many people are moving to PC. It's easy to see why. And I think that would give PlayStation as a console more of a place, because it would be one box that you have the confidence of knowing that you can buy any game and it is going to work on that machine, which is something we haven't had the pleasure of doing since 2006. And I think Sony knows that's important to people. So anyway, I'm going to stop talking because this is probably going on this is going on way too long. I don't want to talk this long about one particular thing. But crazy news stories right after Let's Talk PlayStation. So great. I love when that happens, but this was like too big. I could not wait a week to talk to you guys about this. So, and also, I mean, that LTPS was too long anyway. It was like 20 minutes. So doing this would have made it 30, 40 minutes, because we didn't even get to talk about those two other news stories about the PS4 units shipped or PSN revenue. So we'll wait till next week to do that one, or to do those two news stories. Other than that, that's it. And you're still getting your PS3 online multiplayer video on Tuesday, so be on the lookout for that. I play some old PS3 games online and talk to the folks about why they're still playing PS3 in 2019. Other than that, that's it. That's all I've got for you in this video. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in my next video. You take it easy.